Welcome back to Business Ethics. My name's Tom, and today we are going to talk a little bit about ethics programs and kind of some of the components of ethics program. Um, and I'll give a little bit of framing for uh, the orientation of an ethics program. So let me say. So I'm going to talk about two different orientations here. A compliance orientation and a values orientation. And the best way to think about this is, you know, there are kind of two different mindsets towards ethics in in a corporate or even just a small business setting. And these somewhat correspond to the idea of like corporate social responsibility or like a purpose first model of business, and on the one hand, and then also a more of a profit first orientation towards business, kind of more of a classical view of like free market capitalism kind of um, view of towards business. So um, when it comes to a compliance orientation, let's do the second one first here. This is the idea that, your focus is on compliance with ethical rules, right? Sometimes it's just like legal rules, but your focus here is on, people not doing the wrong thing, right? You want them to fall in line and not break the rules, right? And so, it's really focused on keeping employees in line, kind of deterring them from doing anything bad or anything unethical or anything illegal, and kind of keeping that in line. Sometimes maybe you'd be very focused on like punishment, um, making examples of people, all these kinds of things, right? So it's kind of like a very negative orientations, like do not do these things, right? And so you could imagine like a code of conduct kind of written like this, where it just says like employees shouldn't do this, they shouldn't, eat on the, main floor, they shouldn't wear this when they're at work, they shouldn't, fraternize with other employees or whatever. A values orientation is different. It's more of like a positive orientation in the sense that it focuses on what employees ought to do more than what they ought not to do, right? So it's a values orientation because it focuses on certain values. You articulate certain things that you want to see in your employees. You articulate certain values that are important to your business. And then what you do is you center your kind of ethical outlook based on like how can I get employees to kind of exemplify this model of what I want them to do, right? So it's more of the carrot than the stick, right? You incentivize, you try to maybe through like leadership examples, um, whatever it may be. You try to like emphasize these values and virtues that you want people to make. So it's more about like cultivating like good workers rather than like trying to stop people from being bad workers, right? So these are, you know, general outlooks, and they can be taken up more explicitly or more implicitly um, in different companies or businesses. Um, but usually, your whole ethical outlook. I'm going to talk about ethics programs, but I'm just going to say your ethical outlook is kind of shaped by this. Um, Now, the reason why I kind of hesitant, I'm going to talk about ethics programs, but I want to say that, a lot of students interested in like construction management. They're interested in starting a small business. Small businesses are really, kind of on the rise, especially when you have lots of tools with technology nowadays. Uh, and so not all businesses obviously have an ethics program, an actual ethics program, because they can't afford to hire people to just look out for doing ethical things. And even a lot of corporations don't really have ethics programs. And even when they do have ethics programs, their ethics officers are typically lawyers. that just make sure that the company's not getting into too much hot water, or they manage maybe a series of lawsuits that they have against them. They're kind of just rolling for a long time. So um, so all these different parts of an ethics program, as I talk about them, are really things that do not have to be isolated kind of activities necessarily. They can kind of be factors in an overall orientation that would even, speak to the activities of like a small business, right? Without having an actual ethics officer. If you have a big enough company, you might have like an HR department. A lot of times, concerns about compliance and grievances with the behaviors of employees are dealt with in HR. So um, and even if you have a small business, the owner might just have um, you know utilize some of these tools from time to time in different ways and kind of like adopt a certain kind of compliance or values orientation, right? So they might, you might just, I mean, you might just know like a boss that you've had one time that was just like super strict about the rules and like very heavy handed, and you had a lot of turnover and these kinds of things. That would be more of a compliance orientation. And then you might have had a job where people are really interested in working there, and the boss is very nice about trying to cultivate you and make you a better worker, and teaching you how to do all kinds of different things, and maybe even paid for some training or something like this. And that would be more of a values orientation without them being very explicit. So anyways, let's go over real briefly these components of an ethics program. Um, so one is ethics officers, right? So someone who's head of something like an ethics department, or someone who's housed in HR, and the person, is going to start to, create an ethics program in all the different aspects of it. Um, if you look on in the book, they have a bunch of things that like an ethics officer does, but basically they would oversee all the things that we're going to kind of or at least maybe subcontract out some of these things that we're going to talk about here. Um, One of them, a big one, is training, right? So in different industries, you do have ethics training to a certain degree, right? You have like sexual harassment training that you might do like online or something like this. You have training about what to do if like from my position, right? Like if a student has like suicidal thoughts or mental health issues or something like this, how to properly deal with that, how you should interact with that person, and all these kinds of things. There's kind of intermittent online trainings or in-person trainings you might do, but you also have trainings in terms of an onboarding procedure that many companies do. So when you start a job, you're going to go through a series of trainings in order to kind of get up to speed to what that company is doing and what your job's going to be. And oftentimes you can put ethics trainings in this portion where you need to get employees up to speed on either what the rules are or what the values of that company are, or whatever. Um, so then you also have kind of like monitoring and enforcement implementation, right? So how do you kind of, if you have, um, I forgot in here, there's a code of conduct. It's also kind of like an explicit list of like what the values or rules are of a company. And in this unit, I think for the um, uh, one of the things we look at is a series of codes of conduct. I think there's two codes of conduct, and then there's one that is a mission statement, and kind of get a sense of what these documents look like and what the language is like, and what kind of values they articulate. But you have a code of conduct. You put one together. There are different ways in which you can implement, enforce, or kind of integrate that into your daily business activities. And one thing to do, I mentioned there's audits or external audits here. So when it comes to something like a code of conduct, one thing you might do is review it, right? What you wrote down 5 years ago might not be super pertinent or applicable to a lot of things you do in your business today. Um, so you'd want to continuously over your code of conduct or your policies. You also would review your training, make sure it's up to date, make sure that you're not, putting things in that training that don't align with the kind of lived values of that company. Um, and also audits sometimes involve review of incidents, right? So if you have ongoing problems, and especially like in a corporation, and you continuously getting complaints from employees or customers or investors or suppliers or something like this, you might have a consultant agency come in and look at the data, right? Where are these complaints coming from? Who are they related to? How often do they happen? All those kinds of things. Um, Also, questionnaires are used quite frequently. You do like a climate survey or something like this. You send something out via email or whatever. Um, and sometimes they're kind of generic. Sometimes they're done for a specific purpose after an incident or something like this. You want to review with people, how are you feeling about things? Do you feel content coming back to work or whatever it is? Maybe it's post-COVID or something like this. Um, Also, communication, internal reporting systems. We talked a little bit about like internal versus external whistleblowers. Internal reporting systems are, these are things you have to facilitate and you have to kind of groom, and you have to uh, have, work with, so sometimes these are like in terms of like hotlines. You have a anonymous number that you can call to report something. Sometimes there are committees that kind of deal with in-house issues, where you kind of you kind of create what's supposed to be like a third person kind of perspective on things by putting together a committee of people who are maybe not part of the issue that you're trying to review. Um, Confidential officers. Sometimes there are just people appointed in various departments that's the person you go to report something, right? And sometimes that's not like your manager or your boss, because what if your complaint is about your manager or your boss, right? So you have those to kind of facilitate the line of communication. And as I've already kind of mentioned, you can go to consultants, you can get an outside consulting agency to come in and kind of review the data having to do with ethical issues. And then the last kind of part here is um, corrective action, right? So the carrot or the stick, discipline or rewards. I guess it would be rewards or disciplines. Um, you know, how are you going to exact discipline? What kind of rewards are you going to have? Is it going to be bonuses? Is it going to be promotions? Are you going to make sure that these are performative based? If so, what kind of standards are you going to have? Are they going to be very explicit and transparent? All those kinds of things kind of factor into your corrective action. And as we've already mentioned, if you have a compliance or a values orientation, that's going to kind of color the way you do your corrective action, what you lean more on, rewards or discipline. Um, and so those are some, like I mentioned, those are all kind of aspects of an ethics program. But depending on the size of your business or the kind of business you have, you might not have all these be explicit tasks, right? Some of these you might skip over. Some of these you might do more implicitly than others. For example, internal reporting systems. Sometimes that really has more to do with, the culture of like a small business, and whether or not people feel comfortable talking to someone about something, about an issue when it arises. So anyways, I just kind of want to make this a little bit more applicable to people who might be interested in starting a business or whatnot. So that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you all again soon.